Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome everybody today to my fourth Tuesday Revolutionize Your Retirement Interview with Expert series. Anyway, without further ado, I just want to introduce my guest today, who's Dr. Roger Landry. And I met Roger. I haven't met him in person, but I met him, was told about him through Jan Hively, who many of you who've been with these calls for a long time have heard and know. And she's a wonderful, I think, model also of some of what Roger's going to be talking about in terms of really successful aging. Dr. Roger Landry is a preventive medicine physician. He's author of the award-winning book, Live Long, Die Short, A Guide to Authentic Health and Successful Aging. And he's president of Masterpiece Living, a group of multidiscipline specialists in the field of aging who partner with organizations to assist them in becoming designations for continuing growth and centers for successful aging. He trained at Tufts University School of Medicine and Harvard University School of Public Health, and he specializes in building environments that empower older adults to maximize their unique potential. For well over a decade, he's focused his efforts on older adults as a lecturer, researcher, consultant, and author. The other part that I think is really important to know about Dr. Landry is that he's a retired, highly decorated full colonel, former chief flight surgeon at the Air Force Surgeon General Office in Washington, and also, as I said, a preventative medicine physician. And if you think about it, and he talks about this in his book too, he spent so many years working with young, vital people at the earlier part of their life and basically, and then used all of his incredible skills and learning and wisdom to focus on really helping people understand how to age well, not just exist, but really age and grow. And I mentioned this when Roger had first gotten on the call. I have to say I have read many books in this field, and I totally recommend Live Long, Die Short. It is really one of the best books that I've read. It not only brings forth a lot of research, but there's helpful tips for individuals as well as a call to action. So anyway, without further ado, I really want to turn this over to Roger. And I'd love you, if you would, start out with telling us about the title of your book. I know every once in a while I've gotten emails from people, what does that mean, Live Long, Die Short? So can you tell us a little about that and what got you interested in this?
I would love to, but thank you for that very kind introduction, Dory, and more importantly, thanks for having me on this show. I'm truly honored to be on it. You have such illustrious and experienced and just top-notch people on your show that I'm in good company. So again, thank you. Live long, die short. Some people ask me, does that mean I'm going to be less tall when I die? Probably will, but that's not what I meant. Live long, die short refers to what we in public health call compression of morbidity. Morbidity is when we're sick and impaired, and what we want to do, ideally, is to compress the time in our aging experience where we are sick and impaired. So be all the best that you can be until you meet the edge of the cliff, so to speak. Certainly the stereotype and unfortunately the more common experience of aging is one of steady decline. Chronic diseases are what usually kill us now versus infections and accidents, which used to be the major source of the end of our lives. Now it's chronic disease, so that frequently we get on track for a long, expensive, lower quality of life, even degrading experience of more and more limitation, loss of independence, and certainly not a trajectory that any of us would choose if we could, but unfortunately, that's what we see. But the research has told us that it is indeed possible, since lifestyle is the major determinant in what trajectory we're going to take, whether we take the be-all-you-can-be higher road or the more likely the steady decline, less desirable road, is mostly dependent upon lifestyle. And I know you and your guests know that for sure, but it's quite compelling. Up to 70% of the determinant is our lifestyle choices. So certainly we would all choose to be on the cover of the book, Our Leaves. I live in New England, and the leaves are a great metaphor for, I think, how I want to age, and perhaps many others. That is, we want to get more colorful as we age. We want to be all that we can be. We want to mix with others to make more beauty. And when our time comes, we want to drop off the tree. So that's what that's about.
Yeah, I think it sounds like the way I would like to continue to live my life, and I hope that happens.
Yeah, occasionally, in an audience, I'll say, who would like that kind of life experience? And not everybody likes to raise their hand, and so I'm fond of saying, okay, some of you want to do it this way, but the others want to suffer, and I don't think anybody does. So it's very nice and very empowering to know, quite confidently from the research and our experience, that it does not have to be that way. And certainly life will throw curveballs at us, and we'll have challenges, and we're not Pollyanna about this, but our ability to take those curveballs, to take those challenges, and to accommodate them, and to continue to be the very best we can be, even with some limitations and challenges, is the key. It really is the key. And
right.
And again, it's just very optimistic to know that when it all comes down to it, is up to us to do that.
Which I think is so important. That's part of what really hit me with the book, is just thinking about it's both inspiring but empowering, as I think you were saying too. And you talk about authentic health and how much we learn from our ancestors. I particularly love that part too, because I've always been interested in anthropology and culture. Can you share some of what you mean by that and what we've learned from our ancestors, and what does it really mean to be authentically healthy, or to have an authentically healthy life?
Oh, what a great question, and I love this question. And what your show is Revolutionize Retirement, and we had a revolution in our history as a species some 250 years ago, the Industrial Revolution, which I don't think we, who have lived our entire lives, and our grandparents lived the entire lives in the post-industrial revolution era, so we don't really realize that for 99% of the time that man has walked the earth, we lived radically different lives in radically different environments, and who we are as a species is still more determined by that ancestral experience than it is in the flash in the pan 1 hour ago that we have had the Industrial Revolution. So we have in our day, from the 99% of the time we've been on Earth, our ancestors lived a life, and that lifestyle is one that we require, in my mind, to be healthy and to age well. And I call it authentic because it is more in line with who we are as a species than any research can tell us, or any new machine, or any new diet, or any new fad, or anything. And I think it gives us, when we understand that lifestyle and what it really consisted of, I think it gives us a template or a benchmark or the means to evaluate any claim that comes that says, hey, I can help you age better. Is it consistent with this lifestyle of that? Again, it's hard to imagine, but say the whole time that man has been on Earth is 1 year. 363 days of that, we were hunter-gatherers, where we were moving, where we were socially connected very tightly in order to survive. Everyone had a purpose. There was no one who was marginalized because everyone was needed. If we challenged again, we were moving all the time, and from an intellectual standpoint, we were always aware, or else the environment would end our lives. We had to be aware of where we were and tell stories and learn from our elders, who were in a very esteemed position. The elders were key, and although they weren't as old as they are today, they were still elders, and you were lucky as a society if you had elders that could guide your society. And of course, all of that changed since the Industrial Revolution. So authentic health is one that's more in line with that lifestyle of moving. We all have heard probably by now the title of the paper that has started such a ruckus in a lot of study, that sitting is the new smoking. As far as risk, that a physician from Mayo actually calculated the risk of our sedentary lifestyle versus smoking and found that the sedentary lifestyle is more of a threat. And it's understandable when we realize that we as humans, for the most time that we've been on Earth, and it's still in our DNA, our physiology doesn't change that quickly in the 1 hour since the Industrial Revolution. It's been, in the course of that 1 year, it's 1 hour since the Industrial Revolution. We need to move, and so it is moving. It is being socially connected in a meaningful way. It is having meaning and purpose your entire life. There is no point where you reach an age where you are put off to the side and marginalized and expected to just do whatever you want to do. The society needed you to be engaged, expected you to be engaged, and because of it. And in addition to that, there was this whole idea of continuing to learn as best we could from the environment, from our elders. And without that, we've succeeded in going the opposite way in a lot of this. To me, that's not authentic health. Authentic health is not rocket science. It's just our ancestors. And to the extent that I don't expect we're going to go back to being hunter-gatherers, but to the extent we acknowledge and understand what that lifestyle, our core lifestyle is, in order to be authentically healthy, we can recreate that. We can bring it back into our lives and then be able to more likely have an experience of the leaf, of being all you can be and what many call successful.
And what you're talking about, too, is confronting for ourselves some of the ageism that is around, which I think can inform too many of us in negative ways. I see this all the time, and it's upsetting. Your stories that you bring forth in the book just really speak to the other side of it, which is if people begin to realize that 70%, as you say, they can control, and that there are really little steps that they can take to be more authentic and healthy, they just don't have to decline the way that they used to think maybe you had to, and that's part of why elders were invisible. I think we're going to see so many more visible elders as all of us in the boomer population and beyond are coming of age. I think you said in the book, and I too am one of the leading edge boomers, so I see it from a personal experience also.
And so am I. You are absolutely right. And it is indeed a tragedy that for whatever reason, our expectations of older age has been so limited. And again, most of that came post-industrial revolution, where older adults were not as productive, and because of the mobility of societies and all of the things that happened, our older adults began to be, I say, pasteurized, not like milk, like horses, and put off there. And I think it was meant to be a good thing. You've earned this. And of course, that's true. But what we have learned since is that a lifestyle on the margins of society, without meaning and purpose, without engagement, without a respect for your experience, and without, likewise, your not only willingness, but absolute feeling of responsibility and reciprocity to give back is huge. You've heard, of course, of the blue zones, and I'm sure your audience is aware, but just in case they haven't, Dan Buettner from National Geographic looked for places where people grew old but were also very vital, and he identified 5 areas in the world, and those areas were culturally much more like our ancestral lifestyle, the one we described. And one of the key things that he found is that older adults were not only revered, they were considered absolutely critical and necessary for the society. So in Okinawa, one of the blue zones, you ask someone how old they are, and they lie to you, and they tell you they're older. Because from the age 40 on, they just want to be older because they see that this has such meaning and is so important and it has such purpose. And again, this is the way it has always been and it should be again. There was one revolution, the industrial, that changed this, and your revolution, I love the title of your show, I think, and the boomers, I think, are clearly going to be part of that because we know what they're like. And they're not going to settle for this ageism, this limited expectations, this marginalization. In our work, we, of course, with who we work for to build environments where people are going to age in a better way, we certainly address ageism and limited expectations. And probably where we find most of that is certainly some in public policy, but more often in the hearts and minds of older adults themselves. They have grown up in a society where the expectations are so low, and they have internalized those expectations, not realizing that as long as you have a pulse, you can grow. And to age in a better way, it is necessary to grow. And growth involves not only moving and continuing to learn, that's absolutely correct, and being socially connected, but it is also having purpose and meaning and giving back to society. And that's where we've got a lot of work to do in our own country and probably worldwide.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think more and more studies are coming out saying well-being is connection, engagement, and purpose and meaning. And it's not just being busy. It's really being engaged and that reciprocity, as you say. And I know you've been really influenced by the MacArthur study on aging. And I think some people on the call probably know about it and some don't. But I wonder if you could tell us about the study, because I think it began to be part of that paradigm shift of viewing aging in a different way. So can you just share that and what they discovered and how it's influenced you?
Well, I'd be happy to, Dory. And you're right. I believe that study was seminal in the sort of course correction or change in course that our society had. It occurred, it was sponsored by the MacArthur Foundation. Went from the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s. As it turned out, my brother was the chief financial officer for the MacArthur Foundation for a portion of that time, so he was very close to it. And so I learned some things that I didn't know about just from reading the book, Successful Aging by Rowan Kahn, that talks about their findings. But they set out to study, I'll even go a little further, Jonas Salk. Many of your listeners, I'm sure, know who that is, but just in case, he was the inventor of the polio vaccine, among other things. And he was on the board of the MacArthur Foundation, and he challenged them. He says, look, we've been studying how to respond to the decline and the challenges and how to deliver care and all of these things in society, and those are good and noble things to do. But why don't we study why is it that some people don't age that way, like in the blue zones? They didn't know of the blue zones at the time, but we know of people who age in a better way. Let's study that. And they did for 10 years. And their findings really turned the whole world of aging and understanding of aging upside down. It smashed the stereotype that aging was only about decline. And it also revealed, quite startlingly at the time, that it was lifestyle, as I mentioned before, that was the major determinant. 70% of physical, 50% of mental, and this was something that today we say, of course, but back then we were convinced that it was all luck, chance. You get to choose your parents, your genes. These were the things that were the major determinants. And so this was quite dramatic, and there's a nice story. When they reported their results, my brother was at the meeting. And he shared a cab ride to O'Hare Airport with Jonas Salk. And Jonas said, Larry's my brother, he said, what we have found out with this study is quite dramatic and has the possibility of changing the life of but it won't happen unless someone applies it. And that set us off, my colleagues, my brother and I, for the last almost 20 years now, to do just that. And he was right. But that study and all subsequent studies, and when you come up with something dramatic, people will set out to disprove what you say. But see, all subsequent studies have only validated what they found, that challenging yourself physically and mentally, paying attention to your risks, which makes sense, find out what they are and find out what you can do to lower them, and being engaged in life, which was defined as having a network of friends, being part of a community, and once again, having meaning and purpose. This was fundamental, and it has set a course for us for magnificent research that many of your guests have been involved in, and future guests I saw have been involved in, and has ignited so many fine people to study in this area, like yourself, and to be in this area and communicate these words. It's definitely turning this cruise ship, and we have to do it because with the demographics and the healthcare costs, the amount we're spending on people who are in later stages of their life is so dramatic right now that it will indeed crush us as a country. That burden will absolutely crush us. I actually studied it in the military. What is the relationship of our medical system to our strategic power? And it was clear that with the demographics, that unless we were able to change course and begin to lower the prevalence and incidence of chronic disease and its effect on our society, that we would become so burdened with healthcare costs because of the aging of our population that we would become a second-rate country. We would not be able to do many of the things that we do today, not only for the world, but for ourselves. So this is all going to change, but you and I, Dory, are committed to this changing more quickly. And that's, maybe it's self-serving for us, I don't know, but the fact is, I'm just excited being part of it, and because it is so optimistic.
No, I agree, but the part I really like, too, is, as you said at the beginning, it's not Pollyanna, because we do age differently, and part of what becomes so important is that sometimes maybe the dreams have to change, but there's still no reason why people can't keep growing and not declining to the very end. It's just it's an important, I think, given to begin to accept as a given that just because you have terminal illness or chronic illness doesn't mean all you need is just medical care, but you really need encouragement to grow and change, which I think leads to, I like that you have this personal lifestyle inventory, and maybe you can share that, because on an individual basis, tied into what you were just saying before, too, about risk. It's a really easy little questionnaire to figure out where you are, what your risk factors are, and then you come up with these wonderful tips that are just little steps, too, that people can take. So I wonder if you can turn to that a little bit and tell us a little about the personal lifestyle inventory, and then we can get in maybe to the tips, the 10 tips you have for successful aging.
I'd love to. Thank you. When our group set out to say, okay, let's do what Jonah said, apply what this research says, it was clear that if we were going to impact lifestyle, that we needed a way to help someone to take a thorough, because we are not just physical beings, we are intellectual and spiritual and social as well as physical beings. And what could we use to help someone get a snapshot of where they are right now? And because our ultimate goal is to change public policy so that this becomes a better country, a better world to age, and where there's the appreciation and the engagement, empowerment that we talked about, that we would need data and a compelling reason and compelling arguments to show that if you just do, this is the result. And it was very important that we developed a way for someone to take a look at their lifestyle. Now, there are many things out there, health risk assessments. Those tend to focus on the health, and that's important. And there are physical assessments you see often with trainers and things about what you can do physically. But it was clear it had to be comprehensive: physical, mental, social, and spiritual, were the four areas that Dr. Kahn, again, who was one of the lead investigators of the MacArthur Foundation, still with us, still guiding us at 90. And he felt that when someone had the ability to take a look and see where they really were they neglecting one aspect of their lives? And during our lives, we have like a sine wave, we have peaks and troughs of where we're healthy or paying attention to our full selves. And I'd like to think we're like an orchestra, and there's the brass, and there's the strings, and there's the wind, and there's four aspects of it, and we have to pay attention to all of it if indeed we're going to have the music of health and the music of successful aging. And so we did. We developed a lifestyle review, mobility review, which was designed to do that. In the book, I gave a short version because it's a little longer than that and slightly more complicated, but by definition, it could not be so complicated that someone wouldn't want to take it. And the one we use with our partners is excellent. We've had, maybe 20,000 people take it. And what it gives the individual first, saying, okay, you're really doing well physically. Congratulations. and you keep it up. And intellectually, maybe there's probably a little bit more you can do, and here's the reasons why. We find that to the extent we continue to learn, we can grow new pathways with neuroplasticity. The brain, we're actually the architect of our brain, and so we should challenge and continue to learn new things. So perhaps you should consider learning new things, and we don't tell them. This isn't a prescription. This is an awareness and education. In the environments where this happens, then we can guide them to some things that are happening out there that might address this. Or you may say, socially, you become a little bit of a hermit. You go out for meals, maybe occasionally, but for one reason or another, you're not meeting new people, and you're not connecting with your older friends, and you're losing friends because they're dying off or moving away, and you're becoming more isolated, which is in fact the more common story in our society, with devastating results. Or from a spiritual standpoint, your spiritual self, from the sense, the broad sense of what's your meaning and purpose, and are you considering what your meaning and purpose and what your legacy is? And people look for that in faith, or they look for it in nature, or they look for it in animals, with children, with books, with music. We're all different in where we look for it. Meditation can get us closer to that. And so with that snapshot, with those questions, we can guide people to the extent they want to in a coaching way. Coaching is not about telling someone what they need or what they should do, but saying, what do you value? What do you really want to do? If someone says, I want to lose weight, we would ask why and why, until you get to the bottom line, which may be, I want to get down on the floor with my grandchildren and be able to get up. And that's what coaching really is. And I think that's necessary. And not everyone has a coach. We, certainly the communities we work with, we make sure there are people trained, but just that knowledge can be good. And so that's what the purpose is. Give a snapshot, take a look, start to make a plan on how I can lower the risk, start paying attention to all aspects of my orchestra, so to speak, and then be able to take it down the road a year or so later and see what effect you've had, other than I think people feel better, and anecdotally they're better, but to actually see data. And then, over and above all that, the aggregate data that we can get from that, the basis for potential public policy change. So when people can move naturally, they'll go do errands and move safely, and whatever barriers there are to moving, we get tremendous results from that. Here, look what happens. You reduce the likelihood of diabetes. You reduce the likelihood of cancer, of heart disease, even of dementia, of Alzheimer's. And see, look at this. And so that is something worth investing in. It's a relatively small amount with a huge return. So it's data-driven, but it's meant to help the individual as well as be the basis of policy decisions.
And you've implemented this in a number of community. You have partnerships, and maybe this might be a good time to mention that. And I also had noted in your book that in addition to some of the continuing care retirement communities that have partnered with Masterpiece Living for Successful Aging Centers, that there have been grants to bring some of these concepts into the affordable housing in Michigan, I think. I'm not sure if there have been other places.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of times questions come up on these calls. And I do want to say nobody's asked questions yet, so I want to encourage people to ask questions. I think you're covering so many wonderful things. People probably are saying, I don't have any questions to ask, but I do want to
certainly welcome them
to do that. But can you, because it's the application of it, and I think if I read it, you've now got follow-up data like 3 years post many of these people using the inventory and making these little small step changes and really having, as you say, evidence-based information about different ways to age. I'd love for you to share a little bit more of this application of it.
I'd be very happy to. It's in my life for the last 15 years. What we did after my brother's conversation with Jonas Salk was to think about what we could do, and we came up with these tools someone could use. But what became very clear very quickly is that where all this happened, the environment was critically important. So if someone was in an environment that truly believed that older adults could continue to grow, that the results were much more spectacular, exponentially much better. And so we actually then began, okay, so we're going to need to partner with communities so that they can become places, and we'll have these tools for someone to take a look at their lifestyle, find out where they're at risk, and work with a coach to lower that risk, and have programming, have things happening that they can engage in and freely choose or make it happen themselves or start something new so that they could lower risk. Now, Jonas had said that a logical place to start would be in continuing care retirement communities where there are all levels of care, and we certainly started with independent, and that was many years ago, and that was where we intended to start and stay for until we got enough data and experience and refined what we were doing so that we could bring it to a larger portion of the population, which is what's going to be necessary if indeed you ever want to influence public policy. Because as we know, a very small number of people live in retirement communities. So we did, and so for 5-6 years we worked just with the continuing care retirement communities. We have 80 partners now where we work with them, but we were always desirous, sometimes a little timid. Are we really ready yet to move out? And we moved into a senior center environment and that was a great experiment and pilot, and that has proven to be excellent, and we've learned so much from that to be able to branch out. And you're right, we received a grant actually from the MacArthur Foundation, and my brother's not there anymore. He's been gone a long time, along with the Leading Age and two other recipients. But our focus was to bring this whole concept of creating an environment that would encourage a better aging experience and empower people to do that to affordable housing. And we did. We partnered with the American Baptist Homes of the West, and we did a control study with 3 different communities over a 2-year period. And the results were, not surprisingly, just about as stunning as all the data that we had prior to that, which now, Dory, is, we have over 12 years experience working with continuing care retirement communities, thousands and thousands of data points. But what we did see is that houses were limited in HUD housing and affordable care housing, and to have all of the staff and programming and physical environment perhaps of other retirement communities. So there were challenges there, but what we showed, and this was particularly heartwarming for us, is that you could accommodate and you could still see the positive results come from that. Maybe not as dramatic as where there are more resources, but from our point of view, that's really what we were able to show, that if indeed we want people to age in a better way, and so many people live in affordable housing, that it will be necessary that there be a few more resources available to them. It doesn't have to be dramatic, but that has a return on investment that is exponential. And yes, our plan now is to bring it more to affordable housing, continue to work within senior living, but also we're going technical, and within the next year or so, we're going to be reaching out to people in their homes over the internet too. But the whole point is an approach which says, let's together take a look at the lifestyle. First of all, lifestyle is important, and this is what lifestyle is about, and this is the authentic kind of lifestyle. And where are you with this? And here's your results, and here's where you're at risk. And would you like to talk to someone about what you might do to lower those risks? And it's going to be you crafting your plan with a coach, and then doing that and tracking it, and then just marching down the road towards a better aging experience.
So did the 10 tips to successful aging that you write about, this has come from all of these studies that you're talking about?
Yes, the thousands and thousands of older adults that we worked with, they provide, in the book I tell just a few of the stories. There are so many very positive stories, and so what we've gleaned the experiences and the best personality and characteristics of the lifestyles of these people. And Dave Letterman makes everything in 10s, right? 10 tips seemed appropriate, and people want practical advice.
Absolutely.
And coupled with the ability to take a look at your lifestyle and get feedback on where it is, coupled with what tips might be particularly valuable for you to consider, and because these could lower your particular risks, that it became obvious that we should get with some practical practical help and practical advice. And I've been on the road a lot, giving thousands and thousands of talks, and people like to leave the place not only optimistic and confident that they can do something, but with some practical tips. So yes, the tips reflect the lifestyles, and you can predict what many of them are. It's moving more naturally, and not having to run marathons or do things like that, but to have movement as natural in your life. First of all, right now, 65% of the waking time of the average American is spent behind a screen of some sort. And with our work and our recreation and our phones and our iPads, and most people are sitting when they do that. And so we are a sedentary society. And remember, our hunter-gatherer ancestors, they moved. And this is radically different, and we are paying a huge price. And so you can predict others, like using your brain. I talked about being the architect of your brain, and we're only still just touching the surface as to what's possible with the brain at any age. And to think that the aging brain can't do things well, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like Henry Ford said, if you think you can do something or you think you can't, you're right. And staying socially connected, very important. Beyond just the fun of it all, this has been shown in very dramatic research to influence the prevalence and incidence of cancer, heart disease, and dementia. And significantly bolsters the immune system, among other things. And knowing your risks and laughing more, which great results from that. Having children in your life, that intergenerational experience is so healthy for both. And yet in our society, we become much more isolated. Purpose, I think we've talked about that. I can't speak enough about that. Purpose and meaning, and I know you value it. I bet you just about every one of your guests at some point mentions that. And then the other one has to do with stress. That our society has unprecedented levels of stress. Let's go back to our ancestors. Their life was essentially time was not the way we know it. It was sunrise and sunset and seasons and phases of the moon. That was time. And a time-dependent society is a stressed society. And one that is not based upon time is not likely to be stressed. And we all know that in those moments when we feel most calm and joyful even is when we are mindful and when we are focused on a task rather than worrying about our to-do list or what might happen in the world or ISIS or the political campaign, what they're saying, or the neighbor down the street, or all these things that stress us out. I got to get that done. And that moment when I love to talk to artists, and I say, when you're drawing, what happens to time? And they say, it's gone. It's irrelevant. And again, you can't be stressed when that's the case. And I say, how do you feel? And I get answers from calm, happy, complacent, joyful. And this is just being in the moment. And this is a huge counter to the accumulated stress that is associated with higher incidence of cancer, dementia, also heart disease, all the big players. And our approach to life, our very stressful society, is not getting any better with the technology. But an awareness can bring us all to have those moments of mindfulness through meditation or a craft or being with an animal or in nature. It takes, and we know it when we feel it, even if it's just seconds. That breaks the momentum of the stress that continues to build and cause significant damage, both in the quality and the quantity of our lives and the likelihood that we'll be afflicted with impairments. Those are basically the 10 tips, and I went a little long, but I hope that's okay.
No, I think it's wonderful. And just to stay a moment with the stress, I think the quote I remember is, the stress rots us from within, which is really what you're talking about, and it can cause so many things. And it's one of the things I really like about your book, in that with each of the tips, what Roger has at the end is that they're little pearls of tips that they've learned, and just little suggestions of things that one could do if one wants. And the other part that I really like is that you say if somebody tries to do something and it doesn't work, then they were trying to take too big of a step, which is what I also think happens in the kind of coaching work I do, that it's those little tiny, you can't go from A to Z. You need B, C, and maybe even little steps in between that. And I think that's what the book really really speaks to too. Yeah, which is
Dory,
great.
that is so important. You're obviously a coach, knowing the value of that. We're stuck. I challenge every one of your listeners right now to say, okay, how many of you are doing something that you made a New Year's resolution to do? And in my informal polls, when I give speeches, I rarely get anyone to raise a hand. And so it is stunning in so few are. And it's understandable when you realize that in our society, when it comes to change, we only value dramatic, exotic changes we can boast about, changes that again, really large chunks. And the fact that another thing we inherited from our ancestors is a fear response. And when when our ancestors were faced with large change, it usually meant a threat to their very existence. And so we are wired, when we are facing large change, to have a fear response that comes right out of the amygdala in the brain, which is the fear center, emotion center. And what happens with that fear response? I mean, it may not be a shaking, yelling, wide-eyed fear, but it is a chronic fear response that shuts down many of the very functions that we need to make the change, to have the change be successful. Robert Mora was writing a book regarding this, and he talks about the Japanese approach to change, which is kaizen, K-A-I-Z-E-N, which basically, as you said, Dory, and as you know so well, is about small bites, small steps. And I love telling the story of Joe. He was a patient of mine it was a heart attack ready to happen. He was overweight and he was sedentary and he had high lipids and high blood pressure. And I worked with him for a couple of years and we were able to get him to quit smoking, which was significant, but we couldn't do much else. And so he was still at extremely high risk. And doing the research on this book, reading Dr. Mora's work and studying Japanese approach, I tried it. And I said, Joe, how about next week, during this next week, until I see you next week, how about you just stand during TV commercials? He says, that's it? I said, yeah, that's it. That's all I want you to do. Not exactly something you could boast about, but when he came back in a week, he walked in with a swagger, Dory, because this was the first time the smoking was one. For the most part, he was totally unsuccessful with change. And for the first time, he felt, I can do this. I could do that change. I did it. And then I asked him to walk in place, and it was a slow, progressive, small bite type of approach that resulted in today he's 5 miles a day. He walks every day, and he's off all of his meds. His risks are dramatically lower, and he's lost 50-plus pounds, but it was a lot slower than we Americans value. It's a lot slower than most of us feel is worthwhile. And so this contradiction that we only want and respect big change, and yet big change has the seeds of failure right in there, that makes us put pictures of pigs on our refrigerator because of the self-loathing that we get from the lack of success. Small steps can never fail. Never fails, really. When Joe didn't meet what we had agreed on, I said, Joe, I'm sorry. We just bit off too much. That was just too much. So let's step back. And then he was able to get right back on track. And what he developed, really, Dorian, as a coach, is the sense of confidence and competence that he can change, that he can make a difference, that he is empowered, and he's not a failure, and he's not weak, and he's not doomed to live a lifestyle that he knows is going to result in a bad end.
And it's a great example, and it speaks to, and I know you in the book mention it, but Ellen Langer's work with just how expectations influence how we behave. And if we begin to expect different things of ourselves, or if other people begin to expect different things of us, it's amazing what can happen.
Ellen is isn't that great work that she does? Have you had a guest talk about it? Shall I tell the story of her experiment back in the 70s?
Well, I'm not sure if on this one we have, but why don't you just give a brief little overview of it, because not everybody comes each time.
As you said,
I think it'd be good to learn.
As she said, she has shown us that how we feel about things, what we expect of ourselves, can frequently, and does, the brain tries to make that a reality. So her experiment was in the 70s, where she took men who were in their 70s, and she brought them into an environment that she had recreated, it dated the 50s, which was 20 years previously when they were 20 years younger. And prior to bringing them to this place, she did some biometric studies. She took pictures and did hearing and vision and blood tests, and she videoed some of them as they were coming into the area where they were going to be for just a week. And did they carry their luggage? How did they move? What was their posture? And in 1 week's time, it was dramatic what she saw, the changes of how they looked in their photos, their vitality, how they spent their day, their posture, their biometric studies changed. Their hearing was better. Their vision was better. And how can that be? And for her, and she lays a very compelling argument for this, and has subsequently, her book Counterclockwise talks about this in a great way, that to some extent our brain makes our expectations come true, or tries to. So at least we can come close. We heard motivational speakers talk about we are what we think about. To the extent that we think of ourselves as better, and we have expectations that we can continue to grow, we will do that. So it's great work. It's very optimistic. Yeah. If you ever can get Ellen, that would be a score. Because
I would love to. I've heard her speak a few times, and I'll give it a try. I have a bunch of questions now from people. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, good. No, let's hear the questions. That's good. I was just going to say I live down the road from her, but I haven't. I'm in Massachusetts. Haven't been able to meet her, but it's a goal of mine. But I'll be happy to field any questions.
Okay, let me do some questions. And if you live down the road from you, I may have you. Maybe you can help me connect with her or something, even though you haven't met her, but we'll see. Okay. So I have a few kind of that are on the more individual level, and then a few that are more training level. So I'm going to start with the individual first and then move to that. So Tess from Mount Vernon says, I'm a 68-year-old alert woman. I don't look my age. I love to dance, walk, swim, work, but due to stiffness, it's difficult to walk, getting up from sitting and working because she can't move so quickly. And then she had this experience when she went to the beach, the waves knocked her down because she couldn't get up quickly enough in between the waves, and says, I could have drowned, but I had to get out of the water, and it just made me feel old and sometimes depressed. So she just wondered if you had any thoughts with something like that on how does one become empowered with a situation like that?
Tess, you sound like a magnificent example of aging successfully, but like most of us, life can sometimes throw us a curveball, and sometimes it's an emotional curveball. And it certainly was physical with the waves, but I think the real effect is emotional. And we talked about this earlier, Dory, relative to expectations and being marginalized. And sometimes it doesn't take much to tip us over and start, if not a physical decline, an emotional decline, and with depression and those sort of things. That's very, although understandable, to the extent it continues and it limits our confidence in our ability to grow, our ability to accommodate whatever life throws our way, is very dangerous. And most of the time, I think I would continue your lifestyle, because it is one that is, with the movement and the optimism, it's one that will serve you well. And you have to realize you will be reminded periodically that you can't do what you could before, but that's okay. Okay, you don't go into rough oceans, all right? That's okay. Or sitting in the ocean is not a bad deal either. With lakes, that's relative to the swim. But the point is that, yes, life is going to throw you curveballs, and sometimes they're dramatic reminders that we're not what we used to be. But so what? We're so much better in so many other areas. And it's a privilege to get to be older. And so I would just full steam ahead with your lifestyle. Be reasonable. Accommodate where you can, and don't let the one little that you're not 15 or 30 or 40 anymore set you back.
Sounds like good advice. Here's another that's somewhat related, because I think it's about expectations and mindset, but from Florida says, Dr. Landry, I hear my friends and relatives blaming age for everything and complaining they're too old for things. For example, if they forget something, they think they're losing their mind, or if they stumble in gym class, age is messing up their balance. If they don't hear you, well, that's blamed on age too. So Danielle wonders what you'd say if you heard them complaining that they were too old to do something or having a negative view of aging. How can you empower someone with that mind?
I think what we have to realize that this is ageism, and as we said before, probably the greatest reservoir of ageism, which is basically a bias against older adults, lies within older adults themselves, because they have indeed been raised in a society and saw their grandparents or great-grandparents, and you saw all the messaging of society that was, and commercials and whatever, that was not flattering for older adults. And they live in a society where older adults are not encouraged to be engaged and are marginalized. And so it's understandable that you would not be in a good place if you focus on those aspects of aging. But realize that what you are espousing to and what you are believing in is incorrect. And it's incorrect from the point of view of the history of our species. As I said, 99% of the time, older adults held special revered places. And yes, no, they couldn't do everything, but they gained things as they aged. They gained wisdom. They gained experience. Very quickly, if you give us a young person a task and you scan their brain, one area of their brain lights up in order to complete that task. You give the same task to an older adult and you see the entire brain begin to become involved and light up. There are those, the agists say, they need it to complete the task. No, what they're doing is you're seeing wisdom on a scan, that when we're older, rather than just jump to a conclusion or just jump to solve something, we're incorporating our experience, our wisdom, and our experiences over decades in order to come to the best solution to this. This is a faculty. This is a gift. This is something you've earned. These are the things you should concentrate on. Yeah, you don't run as fast. Maybe you can't walk as fast. Maybe you can't walk at all, but you can continue to move. Look at Stephen Hawking. My goodness, Stephen Hawking, at 29 or 30, paralyzed except for his lips, and yet still alive. He should have been, they told him he would die within a year with Lou Gehrig's disease, and he still is contributing to our knowledge of the world and the universe. Come on. You don't have those kind of limitations as Stephen Hawking, and he's still producing and having purpose and meaning. So it's a matter of what you focus on. Remember what we said about Ellen Langer. So program yourself for success and continued growth.
Great. So Gary from Denver says, it seems that retirement is counterproductive, a life-shortening concept. What are your thoughts on this?
Absolutely, Gary. As we define retirement now, and Dory is she's got full battle gear on this thing. This is what your show's about, and I congratulate you. No, this idea of retirement, again, is a new concept in the history of humans, and the way it is defined now as very age-specific for the most part, and most people live their lives with the idea that this is the nirvana at age 65 or whatever, when I'll be set free and it's just going to be beautiful. And in almost every case, people say, hey, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, and we see radical mortality. We used to see a lot more than we do now. Right after retirement, there's a few years time where we see large amounts of mortality, people dying because of, I think they come to the realization that what they wanted their whole life is not what they wanted. So retirement in the sense of being marginalized in society, only recreating, only doing what you want to do. Yeah, there's some element that you've earned that. But much more importantly, if you've been listening, is this whole sense of meaning and purpose. And I know you believe it because you said retirement seems to be an obsolete, incorrect, wrong term. And it's absolutely right. Dory, I'm sure you've had guests talk about the next phase of your life or what am I going to do now? I'm just graduating from college or something. This is a time for growth. Continued growth, exploring who you are, exploring what you've always wanted to do or some dreams that you maybe left behind. It's about growth. So yes, throw out that old concept. Let's get rid of it. It is garbage, and let's think of it as the next phase of an exciting venture at a time of growth.
Great. So now I have a few questions asking a little about training and things like that. So Mary from California asks, how do you decide how to add partners? How has that evolved? And I know in the back of the book there are a number of places now. So can you speak a little about how people partner with you, or how some of these centers for successful aging partner with you?
Yes, surely, I'd be happy to. Our partners, for the most part, early on, were all within the senior living area, and senior living has come to realize that the older adult is changing. Whereas decades ago, they wanted to be healthy, and so if you had a wellness program, that was good. If you had a little room with some machines in it, that was good. But this new older adult, that's a different breed of cat. They seem to do some reading and are on the internet and know what's possible and know some of the things we've been talking about, and they want something totally different, an environment, sort of like a university where you go in order to grow. You grow physically and mentally and socially and spiritually, and to be the best that you can be. And so these partners then say, what we're doing now isn't enough, so who is doing this? And they do their internet work or ask their friends, and we have a name now, and we're called Masterpiece Living, by the way. And so they seek us out, and we partner. We don't partner with everybody, because some are doing it perhaps for the wrong reasons, only to fill up and not make the commitment that is clearly there to be for a culture shift of where you become, as you mentioned, a center for successful aging. That's actually a designation that we have for those who meet some very stiff criteria. You can partner with us, and then you could work to become a center for successful aging, a much more attractive term than a retirement center. But we're also talking to cities now. We have our first city in Oklahoma we're working with, where they will become places, the whole city, where someone will age in a better way, where they may want to retire or continue to live. And the cities are interested in this because for the first time, most of the wealth is in older adults, so they want people living there. But they also don't want to be burdened with the huge healthcare costs and services demand that an older population brings. So they seek us out for the most part now on the internet, and we have talks, and then we move on together as partners. And this is a definite partnership. So senior living, affordable housing, and senior centered a little bit, and now more and more cities, and ultimately just partnering with an individual over the internet.
Mm-hmm. So it ties into these next couple of questions I have. Jan from West Yarmouth asks, how about people who are aging in place? Have you thought about incorporating your approach in a professional development program for experienced service providers?
Oh, Dory, we know who that is, Jan from West Yarmouth. Thank you for your
That's
question,
how I met
Jan.
you.
Jan, thank you for bringing me to Dory's attention. I appreciate it. Jan is a magnificent person, and an actually appropriate question. Yes, most people will continue to live in their homes. The term is aging in place. And again, that will by far and away the largest segment of our population will live that way, and frankly, we don't have retirement communities or other places for people to live for the large population. So it is absolutely critical, if we are true to our calling, and we consider this a moral imperative, my group, to bring this to everyone, and not just to perhaps people who have a little more money and they can be in a retirement center. So we are making great strides, as I mentioned, to go to cities where we would reach people who are living in their homes through city centers and functions within the city, the Ys, the churches, or the city itself if it's a small town. But also, as I mentioned, to reach out to people, and more people are now computer literate, and so we, at an older age, very rapidly growing segment of the population who's have iPads and they're very comfortable with this, and are now developing the technology and partnering with partners that together we can bring these ability to take a look at your lifestyle, get feedback, find out where you're at risk, get coaching, and then have the ability to be pointed in the right direction that you want to go with our resources or resources in your area that can help you address some areas you may have been neglecting and therefore lower your risks. So absolutely, to the extent that this is the right thing to do, and we believe it is, we have a moral imperative to do that, and we are marching down that road. It's not easy, but we're definitely committed to it.
Great. And it ties into this question from Meg, who's in Boston, who says inspiring work. And there were a few things she was wondering. One actually dovetails with Jan's question about training volunteers to fill the staffing gaps in low-income housing and neighborhoods. But you may want to comment more on that, but also what's your internet program going to look like in broad strokes, and what are the dependent variables in your studies? What measures of health and well-being?
We also know Meg, too, don't we, Dory?
Right.
Thank you for the question, Meg. I hope you're well, and it's right on track. Your question, I'll start with the end part, the parameters and what we'll offer. So our core approach, which has been to educate, to provide the opportunity to take a look at your lifestyle and have a sense of what areas may be being neglected, and that is putting you at risk. And those areas broadly are in 4 categories: physical, mental, social, and spiritual. And so we will offer the ability for someone to join. They'll get a number of resources that even free, and so they get a feeling for who we are. And then if they'd like, they can subscribe, and they'll be able to take this snapshot, get the feedback, and we will provide coaching over the internet. We'll have a call center also, but for the most part, the coaching will be over the internet in a true coaching response, Dory, one that is what the individual values and what they want to achieve and how it fits into their life and what they want their life to be. We will provide many resources that they can pick and choose, but hopefully the feedback from the reviews, I hate to use the word assessment, but from the snapshot, we can point them in the direction of programming or resources that may be particularly valuable for them. Where we have zip codes that are similar, we can put people together, actually, so they're looking across the table at each other, which we all know is much, much more salubrious. This is what social connection is really about. I think our younger generation is very digitally oriented. They see connection a little differently, but not really. When they experience real connection, they know it's something different. But anyway, we could put people together through zip codes, or if we're dealing with cities, we can get them out, because we absolutely feel, and I know that, and Dory, that this social connection it's priceless, really. And the research has been very clear on the broad value, from brain to physiology to emotions, is the quality of your life. So that's what we would do, and we would hope that people would be able to connect with like-minded people, perhaps people who had similar risks or are pursuing similar programming or similar plans to enhance and enrich their lives and to grow. And so with social connections that way. And we're going to continue to grow, to develop more and more resources, to have, with the video age, lots of very usable small video educational segments. I'll be doing a lot of recording. My colleagues, Dr. Gobble and Dr. Winningham and others, will be doing similar things. And again, we so have enjoyed the face-to-face contact, and that's very important. But in order to reach many more and therefore have an effect on policy, we have to adjust. And we consider it a little bit of an accommodation, but maybe once we get people aware of the value of actual social connection and being together, they'll be out more, even as they use the internet connection with us. So thanks for the question. That's a great one.
And tied in, Mary from California just wondered, is on the internet site, on your internet site, is the questionnaire available there for people?
It is for our partners. We're still in development relative to our reaching out to individuals in their home. I encourage to use the one that's in the book. I think that is a good sample of our approach. It's thorough. It's a little easier. It's not as comprehensive, but we're hoping that within the next 5 to 6 months that we would be out there, and therefore you'd be able to get a larger version. So at this point in time, it's not only for the ones who are communities and partners, but we want to make it available to many more. But the one that's in the book is absolutely free. And I believe that's on our website too. So if you'd like to do it via the internet, I think that it's there. And if it's not, I'm going to check and make sure that it is. That's the livelongdieshort.com website for the book. And so if it's not there, we'll get it there.
Great.
Good luck.
And I do, as I said before, I really recommend this book. It is just power-packed. It's power-filled. It's inspiring and empowering with the stories, with the suggestions. I know that I've kept you longer than the time, but you did say you could stay a little longer. I just wondered if you could just briefly think that the idea, and you commented on it, but policy change is a big part also that you talk about in Live Long, Die Short, and just wondered if there was any other things you want to add about what you mean by that, of just the importance of helping with this paradigm shift of really trying to make some policy change, which is always harder.
Yes, it is, and it takes a lot longer. Thank you for that question. It's critically important to our future. We're still encumbered with the idea that has come, again, from our recent foray into aging from the Industrial Revolution, and I like to think of all of this in terms of human capital. We're a capitalistic society, so that tends to resonate. So capital is really wealth and resources that are over here and we have, and the whole point is that it's of value because you use it. And if you don't use capital, financial capital, it's useless, and that is not a good strategy. What we do as a society is to take something that we have been working on and building. Think of it as, say, saving gold for 70 decades or 8 decades, 7 or 8 decades, and saving this wealth and having this big pile of gold and then just putting it off to the side and never using it. This is how our policy treats the human capital that's in our older adults. It is crazy. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but it's rational when you have an ageist or a post-industrial revolution view of what aging is all about, and you think it's only about decline. And I had one young person say when I was talking about engaging older adults, he says, but they don't know technology. I said, precisely. First of all, that's wrong. They are learning technology. But secondly, the more important thing is that you're looking for a broader view. You're looking for that brain that engages all areas in order to answer a program. This is wisdom. And the blue zones get it, and the blue zones are better for it, and the people who live in the blue zones are better for it. So the policy change has to be, how can we tap into this human capital? So it is about encouraging, facilitating, and acknowledging that a certain lifestyle is going to result in more engaged older adults and lower healthcare costs, but also that there are a number of things that are embedded in our society that we take for granted as this is the way it has to be, that limit the ability of older adults to be engaged, to grow, and to give back and enrich and enhance a society. So a couple quick examples. I was with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation doing a grant on active living by design. Here we have built cities, many cities, that are not safe, either from a lighting, crime, or traffic point of view, to move in, to walk, to bicycle in some cases, and therefore we're encouraging people to use cars and continue to be sedentary. Now, we can do things about that, and there are many cities that are, with trails and with lighting and with traffic. And I was in Ireland, and it's an age-friendly country, and the walk signs allow just a little more time to cross the street than most cities do. That's not a lot, but some. Think of the whole problem with childcare. We have many tens of thousands of women who have trouble finding or affordable daycare for their kids or childcare so that they can work and go about their lives. And we have this huge pool of experienced, motivated, proven childcare grandparents and out there, and we don't seem to be able to put them together except within families. And that's crazy. That's a policy that would be a win-win for everybody, including the older adults. Can't make that happen. These are just a couple of the policies that we can come up with reasons why it shouldn't happen, but what we have to come up with is reasons why shouldn't it happen. And it makes no sense. We have to shoot for engaged, growing older adults who are contributing their skills, which are badly needed for our society.
And the intergenerational part is so important, too. On both sides, there's the importance and the help and the connection.
We have so many initiatives out there in our network of 80 or so communities that have focused on this. And not only have I seen the anecdotes and the reviews and how wonderful it is, but I've actually seen photos and the faces of the children, faces of the older adults. This is something that is magical. And it's not surprising, Dory. The older adults, the grandparents, in our history as a species, were the ones who raised the children. The parents were out working or gathering and hunting and doing those sort of things. And grandparents, this was one of their roles. And so it's not surprising to me that this mystical relationship, not only between grandparents and grandchildren, but older adults and children, is what it is, because I think it's deeply rooted in our DNA.
And it's coming full circle, or maybe just the evolutionary part of it, of just how important it is to recognize it and to start building it back in.
I hope so.
Yeah, hopefully. We do need to pull it together. I have so enjoyed having you be part of this, and I know everybody on the call has, and there's so many people on the call and on the internet listening. Any last takeaway that you'd like to give people?
Well, the takeaway is that this kind of conversation and what you're doing, Dory, is such a great contribution, but this kind of conversation is absolutely necessary. We hear a lot about being disruptive these days, and I believe that with our own personal lifestyle as we age and our unwillingness to accept ageism, either in words or in policy, I think the moral imperative of each one of us, we have to change this. We have to, with our personal lives, with our education, with our training, with our knowledge, and with our work, where that's the case, bring our society to a much more enlightened, or bring it back to a much more enlightened view of where aging fits in the full spectrum of a society.
Yes, that is a good place to end and a good thing to think about, so that we can really recognize, I mean, it's birth to death, and I think it's so important to think about the changes of a policy and what you're talking about, the living long and dying short. Just are going to be, by 2030 or 2020, I guess, there are going to be so many more older people. And when you think about how our society could be if people feel valued throughout and live fully and then die quickly, I would like to be that falling leaf that you're talking about.
It's all win-win, Dory.
Yeah, it is all win-win. And I really love, I know toward the end of your book you have a lovely quote by Jack London, but part that I just wanted to mention, because I think it's just so important, that the proper function of man is to live, not just exist. And I think that's really what you're talking about in your work. And hopefully in time people will come around and recognize how important that is.
We hope so, and I thank you for what you're doing to make that happen, Dory. It's a great thing you're doing, and I congratulate you and appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you so much for being here and staying longer and being part of the conversation, and I know being part of more conversations. So I just want to thank you and thank everybody who's been here, and to be able to think about giving back and being there for other people and to live long and die short. I just think it's a great way to think about life. Thank you, and take care, and thank you so much for being with the call today. Take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.